Good evening, everyone. My name is Haley Dushinsky, and I'm the director of the Center for Law, Justice, and Culture here at Ohio University. And it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you, Ohio University students, faculty, and alumni, to our 2016 Pre-Law Day event. Tonight we have over a dozen Ohio University graduates with us here in the room, alumni who spent their college years here on the Athens campus before going on to law school and then moving into successful careers in a variety of law-related fields. The alumni that are joining us tonight and tomorrow have come back to Athens from all over the country. We have John Stember joining us from Pittsburgh. We have Melissa Saber joining us from Chicago. We have Olayemi Alorin, class of 2015, joining us from her second year of law school at St. John's in Queens, New York. And tomorrow, all of these alumni are going to be joining us for a full day of panels on law and law careers. So these panels are going to begin tomorrow morning here in the Baker Center on the second floor in the conference rooms, starting at 9:40 p.m. We have a series of panels beginning at 9:40 and another round of panels starting at 10:45. The panels will then be followed in the late morning by presentations from some of our student organizations, and we're really proud of our students who are participating in these organizations and in these presentations tomorrow. That includes Phi Alpha Delta, Students Defending Students, Students for Law, Justice, and Culture, and the Ohio University mock trial team. So we invite all of you to join us for this. We especially encourage the undergraduate students to join us for these panels. These are wonderful opportunities for learning about the legal profession firsthand, and also for interacting one-on-one with Ohio alumni who can remember what it was like when they were here on the Athens campus and exactly the situation that you're in today. Alumni, we're very happy to have you here with us, and we thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to come to Athens to meet with and mentor undergraduate students of Ohio University. The event tonight and tomorrow has been organized by Larry Heyman. Larry, would you like to stand? Larry, as you all know and love, Larry is our pre-law specialist and advisor at the Center for Law, Justice, and Culture in Ohio University. And Larry is himself an alumni of Ohio University. He graduated from the Department of Political Science, and he's also a graduate of Moritz College of Law at The Ohio State University. Larry has worked very hard to bring all of you together here today and tomorrow. And in these efforts, he's been assisted by his PACE pre-law associate, the amazing Casey Tisdale. Is Casey here with us tonight? She'll be joining us tomorrow. She's an undergraduate student who's double majoring in psychology and sociology criminology. She's also minoring in French, and she's a certificate student in law, justice, and culture. So Casey has worked tirelessly to help us organize this event, and she also produced the lovely booklet that you all have received as you came into the room tonight. So we thank Casey for that. Tonight, we're especially pleased and honored to introduce an extraordinary individual, Justice R. Marc Kantrowitz. Many of you know Marc Kantrowitz. Many of you know him well. Marc's visit is a homecoming here to Athens in more ways than one. Marc is an alumnus of Ohio University. He's a Bobcat through and through. He holds a BA degree in history and also an MA degree from Ohio University in political science. Marc received his JD from the University of Toledo College of Law in 1978. And after completing law school, he spent some time as an assistant DA in New York. In 1985, he moved to Boston, where he managed his own practice for 10 years, and in that capacity, he concentrated in civil and criminal litigation. He handled more than 24 first-degree murder cases, and he cites this as the most interesting part of his long and storied career. In 2001, Marc was named to the appeals court as a justice in Massachusetts, and he remained there until 2015. In 2012, Ohio University recognized Marc's remarkable contributions and his achievements with a Distinguished Alumni Award. This brought Marc back to campus, and it brought him into our universe. Last fall, in 2016, Marc joined us on campus for an entire semester as a visiting Glidden professor. working with students and faculty associated with the Center for Law, Justice, and Culture, and also the Departments of History and Political Science. Some of you students in the audience may have taken a course with Marc last fall semester, Famous Trials in American History, a history course that he taught for us. Some of you students in the audience may also have known Marc as a resident of Bromley Hall, where he lived for the semester. During his time on campus with us, Marc brought joy to our lives with his knowledge of law and courts and the scandalous and even salacious stories that litter the history of both. So we're so very, very happy to host Marc back on campus this week. Please join me in welcoming Justice Marc Kantrowitz.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Haley. Thank you, Larry. And hello, fellow Bobcats, right? I am one of you. You are one of me. To think in 48 years, you may be up here talking to young students. You know, you're really very, very fortunate to have the Law Center. I did not have the benefit of that when I was going to school here. And last year when I was here for the semester, and now that I'm here for the week, it is really astounding the work that Haley and Larry both do to help the future lawyers, and they're very much appreciated. On behalf of them, I would like to thank both of you, because you really do terrific work. And if anybody in power is listening, give them a raise, right? So you know, when they asked me to give the keynote address, Larry's been working me. He's been riding me like a mule. I get here, I've taught 3 classes on Monday, 3 classes on Tuesday. The first class is 9 in the morning. The next class is 7 at night. You know, he's been driving me. Right before this class, I was right before this talk, I was in another class giving a talk to first year students here. And I was talking to the students, and then I was thinking all week, this is the keynote address. So it's got to be a keynote address. And I'm saying, what am I going to say? You know, what am I going to say? It's got to be somewhat serious. It's got to be, you know, make an impression on you. And after thinking about it, I probably will not succeed on either of those two. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, keep it light. You know, it's Thursday. You've had a tough week. You know, you've had staff meetings, you had to study for tests, you go into classes, you had to prepare, you flew in from Chicago, you flew in from Pittsburgh. So I figured, keep it light. And then last night, the Indians lost. So keep it light. People might be suicidal. So I know in Boston when we lost, suicidal, it was terrible. So, And we're at the end, finally, thankfully, for the presidential race. It's been a very bitter, derisive race, and people are obviously kind of overburdened by that. And there's good news and bad news on that. The good news is that the race ends on Tuesday, right? That's the good news. The bad news is that on Wednesday, the 2020 presidential race starts. So, you know, in looking at the presidential race, you know, and you had, you know, one candidate calling another candidate like boring Jeb Bush, or little Marco Rubio, or lying Ted Cruz, or cheating Hillary. And people said, oh, you know, this is terrible. And it's just so unprofessional and so unpresidential and so unprecedented. It's never happened before in our history, has it? So what I decided to do, I said, let me walk through history and share with you some of the presidential races of this very, very, very great nation. So I'm sure, notwithstanding anything Donald Trump has ever said about anyone ever, he has probably never, up to this point at least, characterized any of his past opponents as, quote, a hideous, hermaphroditical character who has neither the force and firmness of a man nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman. Okay, that was said by a Thomas Jefferson supporter in his race against John Adams. The great Thomas Jefferson, he's enshrined on Mount Rushmore. And those are the types of comments that were flying back and forth, John Adams, the great John Adams, who helped write the American Constitution and the Constitution of Massachusetts, responded. He said, if you elect Thomas Jefferson as president, houses will be burned, females will be accosted, and children will be writhing on pikes. Right? So is it that much different then to now? Let's just jump ahead 30 years later. Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was called a dictator and far too stupid to serve as president by those who supported his opponent, the ever-bland John Quincy Adams. The race involved Jackson's personality, temperament, and scandals, including slave trading, Indian massacres, dueling, and cheating on horse racing bets. Those are the big topics back then. Adams, in turn, was accused of, when he was the ambassador in Russia, of selling an American servant to the Tsar. Okay, so Jackson was accused of fighting a man, chasing him away, quote, like a dog, and then stealing his wife, Rachel. Right? Now, Rachel and Andrew's relationship, were called both immoral and illegal. They said Jackson was an adulterer for having a relationship with a married woman, and Rachel was a bigamist for having two husbands. Now, sadly, Rachel died prior. Jackson became president, and before he went to Washington, his wife, Rachel, died, apparently, perhaps in part due to the savagery that was leveled against her. Near the end, she declared, "I had rather be a doorkeeper in the house of God than dwell in that palace in Washington." So things all look that different today, and when you're looking back. Abe Lincoln, perhaps our greatest president. Abe Lincoln was described by his opponents as a giant ape with an ungainly mass of legs and arms with a hatchet face. And people think that the racists today get a little personal. Meanwhile, his diminutive opponent, Stephen Little Giant Douglas, stood, quote, about 5 feet nothing in height and about the same diameter the other way around. A pudgeball who talked loudly and incessantly about himself and others. And little Marco Rubio thought he was being unfairly maligned. In the Tilden Hayes fight of 1876, Republicans supporting Hayes invoked memories of the Civil War, chanting, "Not every Democrat was a rebel, but every rebel was a Democrat." Meanwhile, the Democrats in the South relied on violent tactics by the Ku Klux Klan and other groups to suppress the black vote. Kind of sounds familiar a little today. Even after that, it took a Congressional Electoral Commission to sort out who won. The commission awarded 3 disputed votes to Hayes, unlawfully in all likelihood, and he won the election by 1 electoral vote. That process, quite candidly, makes Bush Gore in 2000 look well-organized, fair, and civil. Let's go a few years ahead. 1884, James Blaine was called immoral, ambitious, and corrupt. Blaine, years earlier, had made a questionable deal with the railroads. In a letter to one baron outlining the deal, at the end of the letter, he wrote, "Destroy this letter." Right? It wasn't. It was later discovered and released by the FBI. I'm kidding about the FBI part, okay? Meanwhile, his opponent, Grover Cleveland, was blasted for having a child out of wedlock. At his rallies, his opponents chanted, "Ma, Ma, where's my pa?" When Grover Cleveland won, the answer was, "In the White House, ha, ha, ha." Right? Teddy Roosevelt called William Taft a fathead with the brains of a guinea pig. Taft's people countered with accusation that Bernie Sanders, no, that's Roosevelt supporters were radicals and neurotics. Everything old is new again. With the Republican frontrunners unable to overcome their flaws in the primaries, the door opened for a brash New York businessman to sweep into the nomination, a man whose rhetoric was so fiery that he faced ridicule and heckling at every stop. The party elders firmly believe that they can handle this fellow. And who am I talking about? Of course, Wendell Willkie in 1940. So it just goes to show, who are you thinking of? Well, maybe Donald Trump, perhaps. So it just goes to show you that if you take a look at history and you put things in perspective, I'm not excusing it, I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's justified, and perhaps by modern standards, the last 30 or 40 years, it is rather unprecedented, but if you take a look at our history, if I'm calling you a guinea pig with the brains of a guinea pig, then it's getting as vile as anything that's said today, and calling someone a bigamist, someone having children out of wedlock. Imagine today if someone had a child out of wedlock and was seriously considered the president, who'd be president. It just really probably would not happen. And then today, people complain about media bias. The media is biased. The media is incompetent. The media has an agenda. The media is getting it wrong. And now, once again, I took a little look at the media. Let's take a look at the media and through the years. So it's interesting. I write a column for a newspaper. It's on my website too. It's called Law and History, and it talks about once famous, now forgotten cases, which my book is about also. And my latest column is The Jewish Murderer Who Married the Minister's Daughter. And it took place in the 30s in Massachusetts. Now, in the 30s in America was an interesting time to be in America because in the Midwest, and a little further west from here, you had Ma Barker, you had Pretty Boy Floyd, you had Babyface Nelson, you had John Dillinger, which some of the older people in the audience probably recollect. I bet the younger people have no clue who I'm talking about. Okay, they were criminals. They were shoot 'em up. Bonnie and Clyde. Have you heard of Bonnie and Clyde? So it was the same genre type of criminal. They would go, they would shoot it up. And right in Boston, we had the same scenario where these three mobsters robbed a bunch of people, banks, movie theaters. They shot people, they murdered people. And in Needham, Massachusetts, not too far from where I live, they shot 2 police officers during a robbery, and they themselves were ultimately caught. One of them married a minister's daughter. It sounds good. Doesn't that sound good? Good. The Jewish murderer who married the minister's daughter. It's a good headline. The fact of the matter, though, she might have been a minister's daughter, but he was no longer a minister. He was like a car salesman. But that doesn't have the cachet, so they changed it from the Jewish murderer who married the car salesman daughter to the minister's daughter because it sounded better. An even better example is John Dillinger. John Dillinger was, once again, like Bonnie and Clyde and all the people I just mentioned, a criminal in the 1930s, kind of a Robin Hood guy. A lot of poor people liked him because he robbed the rich, but he was really a criminal, and he killed people, and he was just a bad guy. So the feds really wanted to get him, and he was in Chicago, probably not too far from where you live, right? And he had a girlfriend. He says to the girlfriend, "Let's go to a movie." And the girlfriend had the friend also who had just been arrested for running a house of ill repute. She was a madam. She had a house of prostitutes. And not only she was charged with a crime, but being from Romania, she was facing deportation. So she says to herself, "I don't want to get out of the United States. I'm in trouble." So what does she do? She wants to cop a deal. She calls the government, the FBI, or whatever the FBI was called then, probably the FBI, and says, "I got a deal for you. I'll deliver John Dillinger, Public Enemy #1. There are movies, those who like movies, Public Enemy #1. I'll give you John Dillinger, right, if you drop the charges against me and don't deport me and give me the reward money." The government says, "What a deal. That's a great deal. We want Dillinger." And they say, and she said, "Okay, I'll set him up. We're going to go to the movies next Saturday. I'll be with my girlfriend, and I'll be with John Dillinger." And the cop said, "How do we know it's you and Dillinger?" And she said, as reported by the press, "I'll wear a red dress, so it'll be easily identifiable." The Lady in Red. If anybody likes old movies, you've seen The Lady in Red, kind of a famous old movie. And that's how I'll set up John Dillinger. She goes to that movie, and as reported by the press, she's wearing a red dress. The cop said, "There's Dillinger." They wait for him outside the Biograph a movie theater, and then when he comes out, he sees him, he goes chasing down, he goes down the alley, right? I was just there a month ago, goes down the alley, and they shoot him dead. Now, for poor Anna Pack, the woman who made the deal, they did drop the charges, but the government didn't keep their end of the bargain. They deported her back to Romania, and they kind of stiffed her on the reward money. So the bottom line, though, when I was doing the research, got the lady in red. Now, I'm older than you guys, so that's if you ask your parents or your grandparents, who's the lady in red, they're going to know. It's Dillinger. They'll know the story. They'll know the movie. In fact, she never wore red. And then the name of my article is A Lady in Red Wore Orange. She wore orange. She said, I'll go there in a distinctive-looking outfit so you'll know what it is. It was orange. The press reported it as red because it just sounded better, because red rhymes with dead. You know, nothing rhymes with orange, and the woman in red just sounds better than the woman in orange. They just made it up. And in my book, and one of my students is here, and we studied this last year, we talked about a whole bunch of stories where the press back then, it's probably less so today, believe it or not, although people today think the press is far worse, it's probably not. Back then it was, they basically did anything they wanted. Let me bring it back to Ohio. And there's a young audience, you're probably not going to know. I mentioned it in class before. Dr. Sam Shepard. The people in Ohio, you're in Ohio. Does anybody nod? Yes, 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 nod. Dr. Sam Shepard. The Fugitive, famous TV show from the 60s, although the producers of The Fugitive said, oh no, the show had nothing to do with the incident. The incident is a doctor from Bay Village, Ohio, charged with murdering his wife. My God, what's a TV show? A doctor from the Midwest charged with murdering his wife. Sounds pretty familiar with me. So then in the 90s, they did a movie with Harrison Ford. You guys are probably still too young for that, but Harrison starred in the movie The Fugitive. This is a true story. So Sam Shepard in Bay Village, just right outside of Cleveland, if not part of Cleveland, is accused of murdering his wife. It became a big, big, big story. And the newspapers really ran with it, if not controlled what was going on. Excuse me, there was extensive publicity. Some newspapers, especially the Cleveland Press, labeled Shepard as the only viable suspect. They started running headlines like, why isn't Sam Shepard in jail? Quit stalling and bring him in. When are we going to do an inquest? Dr. Gerber. Gerber was the coroner. So there's a headline on the paper. When are we going to do an inquest, Dr. Gerber? That night he says we're doing an inquest. They say in the headlines, when are you going to arrest Dr. Shepard? That night Shepard is arrested. So it was a circus. It was a media circus. Front page. And if the facts occasionally got in the way with the truth, you went with the story that was nicest. So a popular radio show in Cleveland broadcast a report about a New York City woman who claimed to be Shepard's mistress and the mother of his illegitimate child. That was set out. That was in the news. This is now in the early 60s. That's news. That's what happened. He's out having illegitimate children with this woman, totally made up. Totally bogus, totally made up. That woman did make the charge. Nobody even investigated. It was a totally bogus case, which added public sentiment against him. So he goes to trial finally, and for you budding attorneys, you know, you're entitled to an unbiased jury, a fair jury. The trial judge did an interview with Dorothy Kilgallen, a very famous journalist at the time, and basically said, not so many words, I'm not sure why we're having a trial. He's obviously guilty. The judge did not tell the jury, the judge didn't do any type of voir dire of the jury, although the judge was asked to by Shepard's attorney, just ask the jury judge whether they've heard anything about the case and would they be biased. The judge refused to do it, and bar groups labeled that request un-American and attacking the American legal justice system, which in fact is just the opposite. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to ferret out bias and try to get an impartial jury. The judge never questioned the jury about any biases. They never told the jury to disregard any media reports. So every day, at the end of the trial, witnesses would come out, especially prosecution witnesses and the police chief, and a reporter would say, listen, chief, that piece of evidence that was, the judge did not let you get in to the jury. Could you tell us what that evidence was about? And the person would tell him what it was about. The jurors were not sequestered. They heard what the police chief was talking about, the evidence that they were not supposed to hear or consider. And witnesses, prosecution witnesses, were allowed to comment on all sorts of aspects of the case, which the jury later heard by reading about it that evening, or watching it on TV, or reading about it the following morning when they were getting to court. So it was called, in one Ohio state court, called it murder and mystery, society, sex, and suspense were combined in the case in such a manner as to intrigue and captivate the public fancy to a degree perhaps unparalleled in recent annals. That's how unfair that case was. It finally goes up to the United States Supreme Court, and everybody who is going to law school, you take a con law class here, you will unquestionably study this case, the Sheppard case, and the United States Supreme Court struck down the murder conviction, blaming the judge and the trial and characterizing it as a carnival atmosphere. So not only was the judge biased, but he allowed the jury to become equally biased. So, I write about these topics, obviously, in my book and my article. So people who today attack, and they say that in the presidential race, or they attack the media, if you take a look and you put it in perspective in our history, you see, things really haven't changed. One of the themes of my book is that the people today are the same as people 200 years ago. They're as smart, as stupid, as generous, as petty, as rich, as poor, and people just frankly do not change. So this is another case I wrote about, and it was an interesting case because it was once again the media just going hog wild on a sensationalistic case. This case took place in New York on June 26, 1897. Two kids, it's a hot day. They want to take a swim in the East River. They're 13 years old. So they're looking out in the water and say, boy, that water looks inviting. And then they see something like a little, valise or something, a package that's floating in the water. And it's kind of decorated with red and gold. And they say, oh, let's swim out and get that. And they swim out and they get that. And they very excitedly open it up. It's like Christmas morning, but what's this present? It's this part of the human body without the head. It's his shoulders. It's this part of the human body without that. Two arms attached to shoulders and a muscular chest. And that's what these two 13-year-old kids found. A day later, a father's taking his kids to the farmlands of the Bronx. I'm from New York originally. There ain't no such thing today as the farmlands of the Bronx, but back then it was very rural. So he's going to take his kids. Oh, kids, let's go to out to the fruitlands and watch. We'll just walk through nature, and they're doing that. And one of the kids, little 8-year-old Edgar, goes running down, and he looks down. There's a little cliff, and there's the water coming in. He says, "Hey, Dad, there's a big box down there. I wonder what's there." They go running down there, and once again, it's Christmas for them, and they rip open the box, and what it is, it's this part of the guy's body that has been severed. So this is brought to the coroner. They put the jigsaw pieces together, and it's obviously the same person. Now, this got the local newspapers. It was like a piece of meat in front of a dog. So there were two major people back then, William Randolph Hearst of the New York Journal and Joseph Pulitzer of the New York World. That's the same Joseph Pulitzer where people win the very prestigious Pulitzer Prize every year or every few years. Very, very prestigious prize. Now, he is the editor of one of the newspapers, and they just go hog wild in going over the case. Why? Because the readership and the people were so titillated by the story that the readership for Hearst's paper went from 300,000 overnight to 1.5 million. And Hearst told his reporters, the public likes entertainment better than it likes information. And one step further, the public likes entertainment more than they like the facts. If the facts get in the way with the story, you print the fictionalized story because it's more interesting than what really, really happened. And he sends one of his reporters was kind of like, anybody a Superman? Remember Jimmy Olsen from Superman? Nobody said, there's a young crowd here. So he was a Superman, the TV show, and he cub reported Jimmy Olsen. So there was a Jimmy Olsen type of kid back then who went to NYU, and he said, the guy who died, it was very interesting. This was 1897, and he had really soft hands. And it's a big, muscular guy with soft hands, kind of a mystery. Who would do that? Because no men really had soft hands because they did manual labor. So this Jimmy Olsen type of guy was a really kind of a smart guy, and he figured it out. Maybe the guy works in one of the very popular, like, Russian masseuse houses that were very popular in New York at the time. And he was a masseuse, and that's why his hands would be soft, and he would be muscular. So he goes snooping around, and pretty soon he gets a lead. And he gets a name, and Augusta Knack. And he goes to Mrs. Knack's house, and he knocks on the door. Now, what would a journalist today do? He would knock on the door and say, "Hi, I'm Jimmy Olsen from the Daily Planet. I got a few questions." What did this guy do? He said, "Hi, I'm Jimmy Olsen. I'm from the Clearwater Soap Company. I want to sell you soap. Not only am I going to sell you soap, I'll give you soap. I'll give you a few free bars of soap." So he goes in there, gets a cup of coffee. They're talking about soap. He's giving her soap. And then when she turns her back, he steals a picture of her boyfriend, who is implicated. He's the guy who's a masseuse. Now, ethics in journalism. Obviously this guy did not go to the Ohio University School of Journalism, because that was probably stealing people's property from their houses is probably frowned upon today. So anyway, this guy just, I made my point, but this guy ultimately, the woman had set up that the guy whose picture she had, because she had a new boyfriend. She was married, was carrying on with the murder victim, and then got a new boyfriend. So she conspires with the new boyfriend to murder this guy. Okay, so the newspapers clearly, it had it all. It had sex, it had violence, it had them luring the guy to Staten Island or wherever it is where they killed him. They kill him, killing him is not good enough. They saw him up, they chop up the pieces, they put one piece here, they put another piece here, they put the head in concrete and they bury it in the water. And then the press, who had better resources than the police, send divers to try to find the head unsuccessfully. And that's one reason why the press kind of ran at the time some of the investigations, because they had greater resources than the police departments at the time. But the point to be made is they just made it up. So if any factual aspect of a story interferes with the story, then we forget the factual aspect, we write the fictional account, we print it as the truth, and then that's the story that goes out. Now, this is not an indictment on all of journalism. But if Joseph Pulitzer of the future Pulitzer Prize is doing this, then you'd have to say he was probably not quite that rare. So I guess the point of my talk today is, as I said at the beginning, the more things change, the more they remain the same. The people are people, and the presidential race, if you put it in context, might be disgusting, but it's no different than perhaps what Jefferson and Adams and Abe Lincoln and a lot of other of our great presidents, the same type of behavior that was engaged in then as it is now. It doesn't make it right, and also of late, that type of behavior really had dissipated. So now it's kind of a return to the bad old days. But when people start talking about the good old days, oh, those were the good old days. Well, they're not necessarily the good old days. 40 years from now, you're going to look back, and these are the good old days, right? These are, this future time. So that was my point. I'm just going to close now, and I just want to say how impressed I am with you. I have spoken, I think, 7 classes this week, and I cannot tell you how impressed I am by the young people of this school and your generation. And as an old person now, I can say that this country is in good shape if you guys are taking it over. Far better shape than when I was sitting where you are. When I was sitting where you are, 1968, I started. We didn't have Larry, we didn't have Hallie. Even if we had them, I would not have taken advantage of it. I was kind of, OU, party school, let's party, I was not serious. I finished school. I had my degree in history. What am I going to do next? I had to go into the Army. We had the draft then. I wasn't going to dodge the draft. It's interesting. My father's generation lied to get into the Army. My generation lied to get out of the Army. So I wasn't going to lie to get out of the Army. I just didn't think that was right. So I go into the Army. Fortunately, Vietnam was winding down. Instead of putting me in for 2 years, they put me in for 3 months. They let me out, and they said, okay, we're going to extend your reserve obligation. Go find a reserve unit. Hello. Every reserve unit was filled for people wanting to avoid going to Vietnam. So I never even could find them. Trust me, I never looked very hard. So, and I got out after 3 months, after 2 years, and I said to myself, what should I do? And I said, you know, I really liked OU, so I think I'll go back to OU. And I got a degree in then called government, now political science, and I did that. And then I took a year off to teach school. I was a substitute school teacher in high school and in junior high school. As I told you before, that lasted about 37 minutes, and then I said, I'm doing something else. And then I decided to go to law school. And as I told you guys, for me to go to law school, it was really my parents saying, what the heck are you going to do with your life? I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. Why don't I go to law school just to stop them asking me, what are you going to do with your life? So I decided to go to law school. And as I was telling these guys before, it was an option I had. I knew that if I became a lawyer, I could become a lawyer, but I also knew that lawyers became journalists, lawyers became business people. Same true today. It's a very valuable degree to have. So I figured I will go to law school and you know, I'll let the chips, you know, fly where they, you know, they'll go where they go. You don't have that option, because when I went, and I told you in class today, after 9 years of college, my total student loan was $2,500. Right, whereas for you, your total student loans, if you tried to replicate that, would be well over $100,000. So that perhaps explains why, in part, why you're so serious, because you don't have the freedom to say, I'm just going to go to law school because I have nothing else to do. You're going to go to law school because you want to go to law school, because you don't have $100,000 and $150,000 sitting around, you know, while you make up your mind what you want to do. So perhaps that's one reason why you're going to go to law school or some other school. Not everybody here is obviously going to be a lawyer. But I just want to say, from the people I met here, my student last year, young lady I just met now, and young lady I met just this week, they're serious, they're smart, they're dedicated, and they're a credit to Ohio University. So thank you for your good work now. Thank you for supporting me in my old age. And I'll see you guys at the football game tonight. So thanks very much. Take care. Do we take questions, or we? Or you know, I'm going to be around, you know, after if people want to approach me. I know it's very often people like coming to me talking one-on-one rather than asking a group type of question. I'll be around for the next couple of days, so I'll be around all day tomorrow, so please feel free. And contact me, you know, if you want to contact, if you're going to come to Boston. You know, I teach at Northeastern Law School, and if you want to come to Boston, I'll show you around Northeastern Law School. I'll let you come to one of my classes, so please keep in touch. So any questions, anything? Yeah, yes, sir?
What made you pick OU for your undergrad experience?
My father was a guidance counselor. I grew up in New York. In retrospect, you know, after thinking about it at the time, I was close. They wanted to get me as far away from New York as possible. That's it. You know, I was kind of a homeboy, and my parents said, you know, he's too attached to home in New York. Let's get him out. We went on a college tour. We visited, I remember the schools, Robert Morris, Akron. At Akron, they told me, when I said socially, what's it like? And they say, we don't have much of a social life. We party at Kent State. I go to Kent State, I say, what's the social life like? They say, we don't have much of a social life. We party at Akron. Those schools were crossed off, right? I go to Pittsburgh, they told me I wasn't smart enough to get in, so that school was crossed off. I went to Robert Morris, it was too small. I stepped foot on a higher university, as probably you and everybody. It is just a Norman Rockwell painting in real life. It's just beautiful, the people are wonderful, unlike some Northeasterners, and they're down to earth, they're warm, and you know, when I set foot on campus, it's a magical thing that happens. It happened to my daughter when she went to Fordham, and my son when he went to Columbia. The same, they go on campus, they say, oh my God, this is for me. So, Yes, Callie.
What were the most challenging aspects of your legal career?
The most challenging aspects of is representing innocent people, which rarely happened because most of my clients were guilty, okay? And I did big time, I did a lot of murder cases, and you lose a murder case, the client's going to jail for the rest of the rest of his life or the rest of her life, and those were the most challenging. And even if I lost a not so significant case, it's important to them. I think at times, just because we're lawyers, we say, oh, this is just a $50,000 case as opposed to $1 million case. Well, that $50,000 case is as important to that person as that $1 million case is to that person. And whether I represented someone charged with assault and battery, that case is important to them as one of my clients who I represented for murder. So it was, candidly, it was a young person's game, and I never ate well, I never slept well when I was on trial, and then that's one reason I ultimately decided to go to the bench. It's just a young person's game, and I was getting old. So, yeah.
What was your favorite part of law school?
Next question? No. It was my classmates. Absolutely, just wonderful people, and I made some wonderful, wonderful friends. The challenge, the life was, it was intellectually stimulating. It was nice. I liked going to school, but it was the people with whom I lived. And I've always lived I live in Bromley now. I lived in Dowd Hall then. I was, you're living with people. You're with them 24/7. I really, really enjoyed that. So, I think, yeah.
What was your best experience from the Army?
Getting out. No, it was, you know what it was? It was a camaraderie, and when I went into the Army, I went to basic officer, I was in Quartermaster Corps, and they sent me to Fort Lee, Virginia, and in my class there were 82 of us. So all men at the time, women, were excluded. So 82 men, 82 men had a college degree, 45 had an advanced degree, either a master's or a law degree. And once again, like in law school, like being with them, the camaraderie, I think that's the backbone of the military, I think studies show you don't fight for mom and you fight for the guy who's fighting next to you, that's the person you love, and that's the person you want in the foxhole with you. So it was the people with whom and the Army they wound up sending me to Fort Carson, Colorado one year. They sent me to New York. They sent me to Fort Dick. So it was kind of nice. I got a nice life experience. So it was a good experience. Anything else? No? Yeah.
What is your number one advice for someone who is wanting to pursue law school?
You want to pursue law school, think about it, because it's a major, major commitment. And as I've said I've lectured, I said, if you get into Harvard, go to Harvard. If Harvard is foolish enough not to accept you, I think you're wise to go to this school. Not every time, you got to do what you think is right, but I think you're wise to go to the school in the area in which you're planning on settling. I went to school in Toledo, made great contacts, had good internships, I could have gotten a job there. I never intended to stay there, so I left, and I left behind all those good personal contacts, lifelong friends I could have made. So I think that, that would be my advice. But do what you want to do. If you want to say, hey, I've been in Ohio my whole life, I want to try California, I don't want to live in California, so then go to California. You'll despite what I just told you, I moved to Massachusetts, I did pretty well. So anything, yeah?
Yeah, your thesis that things are essentially the same in terms of the attacks or the ugliness of this election cycle. Qualitatively and quantitatively, isn't there a difference in as much as Trump has attacked the press,
Right.
that they're basically crooked and
Right.
corrupt and in the hands of Hillary, and then he's also indicated that he may not accept the will of the people.
Right.
He refers to his opponent as a crook and says that he can appoint a special prosecutor.
The prosecutor, yeah.
I can go on and on
Yeah.
for the next 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I submit to you that there's both a qualitative and a quantitative difference between what Trump has
Well, I think the people I did not cite, I would agree with you. I think modern times, so Mondale and Reagan in their debate, somebody just told me this a few days ago, where Reagan kind of stumbled a little, kind of showing his age and his mental acuity. And someone asked Walter Mondale, why didn't you jump on it? Why didn't you take... And he just said, that's just not me. That's just not the way things are done. There's no question in my mind, if either candidate had made that mental type of laugh, either candidate would have jumped on it. So things certainly have changed, I think, over the last 30 years. Once again, I'm not an historian, so these are my observations. I read a lot, like you read a lot. We all come to our own opinions. So all I'm saying is that, Donald Trump, never called anybody, you have a brain of a guinea pig, or, that hermaphrodite, it was pretty vile type of stuff. And in one of the elections, it was stolen. People talk about Bush Gore. That election was literally stolen. So, it's pretty, as I said, people I don't think change all that much. But I do agree with you. In recent times, it is really an aberration, sadly. So, anything else? So, no, yeah.
So I went to Northeastern. That was one of the schools I was looking at, and I was curious, are you a fan of hockey? Because I know that's a big deal for them.
The what's a big deal? I can't hear you.
Hockey.
Well, hockey in Boston is big. The Bean Pod. It's, we played at the Boston Garden or TD North, and they sell it out. It's the first Monday and the second Monday in February. If you like college hockey, I'm going to the hockey game, if not tomorrow night and Saturday. I'm a big hockey fan. Hockey is big, and BU and BC are really good, and Northeastern's fair, and Harvard's fair, but and the Bruins are really big. The Patriots are really big. Boston College is not real big. Boston's a great place. If no one has been there, please come. Call me. You can stay with me and my wife. I'm sure she'll be happy to hear that. So, or if not, Larry will pay for your hotel room and your stay. So, but Boston, if you haven't been to Boston, Boston is a great place. And once again, I moved there from, New York. So I love Boston. So, anything else? I think people are probably anxious to get out. Hey, listen, thank you. Have a great week. Thank you. Thanks.